$72 billion industry a year. That's an insane number. That's what the gambling industry is actually rolling a year in the United States. And if things have completely transformed the last few years, now it's legal. You can do gambling online. All of us have on our phones either gamblings or game that experience like gambling. So today's guest is David Farahi. He comes from a family that started a motel in Reno and slowly became one of the most impactful owners of casinos in Reno. They're actually a public company. So he takes us behind the scene. He actually showed us the complexity, what it is to run. I mean, if you've ever been to a casino, there's thousands of people working there. So what does it mean to run a business that has to do with addiction? 5% of people are actually addicted that can show up in a casino. And from addiction to the operation, to management, to culture, all that stuff, David brings us right behind the scene. Enjoy it. Hi, David. Thank you for being here with us.
It's an honor to be here, sir. Thank you.
You know, as my preparation, I was like debating how to start. I really was thinking, I had so many questions. I'm going to jump to the middle, I know you did a lot of lobbying and you fought for major things. What would you say, and I'll give the background about you later, but let's just jump right into it. What would you say was the biggest challenge in lobbying for a cause?
Look, the thing that makes lobbying exponentially more complicated is by the number of interested parties. And so if it's a cause that has kind of one interested party that you have to convince them one way or the other, it's pretty straightforward. You figure out what it is that those people, what drives them. You go have that conversation, you convince them it's a good idea, and you move forward. What makes it very complicated is when there might be a specific item that has 10 different stakeholders. And sometimes those stakeholders are at odds with each other. And sometimes almost always, those stakeholders have different interests. And being able to get 10 different stakeholders that have 10 different interests to want to line up and do the same thing is extremely hard.
Oh, that's great. So just to repeat what you're saying, so make sure that I understand it. You're saying the difference in negotiation, classic, because your background, we'll talk about it more, your family really pioneered casinos and build a massive company in Nevada in gambling, and you were involved in so many chapters of that and more. But here's what I hear. I hear that the difference between negotiating, just sitting across a table from someone, versus lobbying is that lobbying has way many moving parts. Is that correct? Am I understanding what you're saying?
I would say sometimes. Lobbying doesn't always have a lot of moving parts, but it can have a lot more moving parts than just negotiating against one counterparty.
Okay, so tell me again. So answer me the question again. What was the most challenging element of lobbying for you?
I would say convincing people when you have a problem that requires the buy-in of a great number of stakeholders, being able to convince them all to move in a common direction is the most challenging, because a lot of times they have competing interests and you have to be able to get them all on the same page at the same time. And it becomes exponentially harder with each new node of the decision-making process.
Yeah, how did you do it? How did you succeed? Because, and please share with us what of your accomplishment.
Yeah,
but how did you actually succeed doing it?
I'll tell you the most challenging thing. It is not the most sexy example, and it's not even the most financially beneficial example, but it was the most challenging bit of lobbying that I've ever had to do. I'm going to get into a little bit the weeds of the gaming industry. So the casino industry is subject to unique taxes. First of all, anywhere in the United States where you have a casino, the casino pays regular corporate taxes, but it also pays a special tax on the gaming revenue.
And that's on a federal level or that's on a state level?
State by state. Mm-hmm. State by state. And in most states, well, let me back up. When a casino wants to send a customer a coupon, you call it free play. So it's free play because it's something that someone could take to the casino and play for free in the casino. Okay, they play a slot machine for free. It's free play. In most states in America, free play is not taxed. And why should it be taxed? It's free. It's a coupon. When you go to the grocery store and you buy a 50%, you use a 50% off coupon for a pizza, you don't pay, the grocery store doesn't pay tax on the 50% of money.
Because there was no transaction of
no revenue. There was no revenue. There was no revenue. Most states do not tax that free play in the gaming industry. Colorado does. And so...
What was the rationale behind it?
You honestly would have to ask them, but like, it's like the rules go out the door when it comes to casinos, because they say, you know, you guys make so much money, you should be able to afford to pay taxes like nobody else. And so I took it upon myself to try to change that rule. And that's what it was. It was a rule. It's not a law. It was a rule that was issued by the Colorado Division of Gaming. Now let's get to the part where there are different stakeholders. The body that issues this rule is the Colorado Division of Gaming, CODOG. But I can't just go to CODOG and say I want to do this and here's why. And I think that if we don't tax free play, casinos will be able to give more free play, which will drive more people up to the casinos, which will drive more revenue, which will drive more taxes, and will be better for everybody. I said that to them. But they are only one, they may be the final decision holder, but they are not the only people that are involved in this conversation. So you have to study who are all the stakeholders. Well, the state is also a stakeholder. And then the gaming tax revenue flows to the 3 gaming towns that have casinos, the 2 counties that have casinos. It flows to the community colleges. It flows to what's called History Colorado. They have a big museum, and all these different stakeholders. And I had to get all of them on board. And what one city out of the 3 cities liked, the other one almost automatically has to oppose.
Yeah.
And so this was a 2-year-long project. The first time, and because of the way the rules were set up, even though the Division of Gaming CODOG meets every month, there was only 1 month in a 12-month cycle where I could bring this issue to a vote. And I worked, I don't remember, 6-9 months to bring it to a vote, and it failed. It failed.
So you first time you brought it to a vote, it actually failed?
It failed. So
wow. How was the experience? Because you worked on it probably for a year, pretty much, right?
I worked on it for, about a year. I mean, it was herding cats. It ruined multiple vacations because I was getting calls in the middle. I mean, it was nonstop.
Did you think about giving up?
Oh, for sure. All the time. And I would get calls from various stakeholders frequently that said, this is a fool's errand. You are never going to get this done. People would call me and say, I'm going to make sure you don't get this done. And then I got it to a vote. And even though I thought I had the votes going into it, it failed. And so I remember a couple of weeks, a month into licking my wounds, I got back on the horse and pushed and pushed and pushed again. The vote failed because of not exactly a technicality, but a minor issue that could have been easily resolved had someone wanted to resolve it. Had to get all the stakeholders back at it again. I think my favorite thing that I did through this process was somebody, one of the stakeholders that didn't like this initiative, went and got an academic study that, when read a certain way, countered my main argument that this was an economic driver. This person did not appreciate that they were now entering my wheelhouse,
which is academic,
which is gaming analytics, gaming data, slot machine analytics, and I know these people, And so, one of the stakeholders was waving this academic paper saying, look, Farahi is lying, Farahi is this, Farahi is that. I called the author of the paper. I had a discussion with him. I explained to him why, in our case, it was what he said in this paper was not relevant. He agreed, and he agreed to issue a letter to the Division of Gaming saying that no, Mr. Farahi
the guy's
is correct.
misreading, and
Yeah.
this guy's misreading.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
But I want to, Unmasked is not about lobbying or gaming or it's really about kind of looking at the experience of failing and not just the successes, right? So I want to pause for a second on that moment. So
Sure.
here you are, you're working on it for a year. You probably have your own pressure to put in yourself. You have your family's business. You have all those things like, I'm going to turn this around. And it smells and feels like it's going to be, this deal's going to happen, right? And then because of technicality, it falls apart. And like you said, I had to lick my wounds for a few, you just said it a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
What got you back on the horse?
Look, it's just, I think all success comes from resilience. I think it's just about resilience and saying, I'm never going to give up. I'm never going to give up. And this underlying understanding that, hard work is going to pay off. And even if you don't realize or recognize how it will initially pay off, you're going to get your just reward. And so in this case, because I had built relationships with all these different stakeholders, and I had done it in an honest, straightforward, direct, fact-based way, I had earned their trust through this, call it 2-year process. A couple years later, began another initiative to change the Constitution of Colorado, which required a statewide vote of the people to expand betting limits and games in Colorado. Up until that point, people could only, the maximum bet was $100.
That's the max you can gamble.
That was the max.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't have games like Baccarat, which is a very important game for the casino industry.
Yeah.
Because I had built relationships with all the relevant stakeholders and I had done it in an honest way, and I built trust with them. When it came time to go forward with this new initiative to change the Constitution, it was much, much easier. It was much, much easier, and they believed me because they knew I had been honest before. And even though the first project, we ultimately got a pass. On the second time, we got a pass. The benefit to the bottom line was it was okay. It was nice. It definitely was not, the juice was not worth the squeeze, but it was nice. But the building of those relationships and having been able to create trust across all those different stakeholders, when it came time for the bigger issue, which was change the Constitution, that's where the reward was.
Yeah. So here's what I hear. I hear that, first of all, obviously resilience, et cetera. But another thing is that you said, look, I am working. It's like I'm working the ground here. Whether it's going to be this thing or thing, I'm thinking long term and deep. Therefore, that deal might not happen, but in the long term, there'll be benefits. Would you say that from the beginning you thought about it? You said, I'm going to use this one as a case study or as a prep of the ground, and if it's not going to work out, I have those relationships? Or you said, no, I'm going to focus only on this one, and by the way, you learn later on that the relationship, the trust can help you some other place.
I would zoom out just a little bit more and just say a foundational tenet of mine is to build honest, genuine relationships with people. And if you can build trust with, your friends, colleagues, people you do business with, good things are going to happen.
That's cool. Okay, very good. So, what a great opportunity for us to go back, actually. So the casino has been in your family for 2 generations or 3 generations?
So a motel was purchased by my grandfather in 1972 in Reno, Nevada. And then my father and my 2 uncles from that point forward took that motel and built it into the Atlantis Casino Resort Spa in Reno, which today has held the title as #1 resort in Reno on TripAdvisor for 11 years straight.
Wow. And it's a public company, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
company went public in 1994. It's traded on the NASDAQ, Monarch Casino and Resort. So I should say I feel incredibly blessed, very lucky, and I stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's
Yeah.
just that's the reality. I've been given a lot of benefits, a lot of guidance, and I feel very blessed to be the child and grandchild and the nephew of all the
giants.
people, of
Yeah.
giants, absolutely.
Yeah, but here's what I'm trying to get to. And you said basically building relationship, building trust, being kind or fair to people is something
Genuine,
that is
be genuine.
Perfect. So my question is it something that when you saw your grandfather at the motel, when you saw your father or your uncles, is it something that was kind of like the culture that they created in the family, or is something that you found more effective? Because that's interesting. Because some of us come from a much
it's the culture of the family. I'll share an example, Boaz, that I don't know if I've ever shared this story, certainly not publicly, but Reno, 2 Jews, 3 synagogues, right? So they're not a large Jewish community, but a couple synagogues. And since my family arrived in 1972, been involved with the conservative synagogue in Reno, and have worked hard to sustain and grow that synagogue. And one day, my grandfather, we went to regular Shabbat services, and my grandfather is sitting in the back row of the synagogue by himself. And I like to sit with him during services. And I said, "Why are you sitting back here?" I mean, the place was 95% empty. I said, "Why do you go sit in the front?" And he said, "I haven't done anything to deserve to sit in the front." He knows that his family has done a lot to sustain that community and that congregation, but in his mind, he only deserved to sit in the back row. And I think, that to me embodies the humble nature that is the right way to live life.
Mm. And you believe also, what a great story, and you believe that we call it culture in corporate, or when we do when we work business, but you're saying that kind of messaging trickled down and impacted the behavior that actually brought you to the same behavior when you're doing lobbying for the.
Look, I think there are some overlaps. I think setting a company culture is a very important thing. Staying humble, staying hungry, not becoming complacent with, being the #1 on TripAdvisor for 7 years instead of, keep raising the bar. That's how you're successful long-term in business, right? You just always stay hungry, always stay humble, and always know that you can do better.
How many people work in that casino? And I know you're not involved the day-to-day. You probably know that because it's a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, when I left as chief operating officer after a decade, we had about 2,500 team members.
And the reason I'm asking is because, again, I'm fascinated by cultures. So like corporate cultures and management cultures. So would you say that attitude that you saw, the story you shared with us, or when you were actually boots on the ground, a chief operating officer, how do you make the cleaning person of the rooms, not just the concierge and the big rollers, high rollers, how do you create that culture? What do you actually, the things you've done to create that? Because a lot of people listen to us, we're like, okay, great, but how do I impact it? I think it's easier when you have 5 employees, when you have 10 employees, because you literally have a daily interaction with most of them.
Yeah.
What happens when you have 100 employees or 1,000 employees? How do you keep on that culture?
Look, I had the privilege of learning under Professor Boris Groysberg at Harvard Business School.
Harvard, yeah. He's a legendary professor, yeah.
He's a legend. He's now a friend and a mentor. He has this saying, he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast in a company, okay?
Yes.
And the #1 way to develop a culture within an organization is by who you hire and by who you fire. #1. And it's
So give me an example. Give me.
I want to give you. Don't worry, Boaz. I'm going to give you an example. I'll give you an example. So when we purchased the Riviera Blackhawk in March of 2012, what we found actually was an organization with about 300 team members that was void of culture. Absentee management, absentee ownership. People just clocked in and clocked out, and it was it. They just, there was no cohesiveness, nothing. And so
That's probably one of the reasons you bought it, no? Because you saw an opportunity.
Honestly, we didn't know how bad it was. It was even worse than we thought.
Yeah.
And we grew EBITDA that property 55% in the first 14 months of ownership.
Wow.
But that is not my proudest achievement. It was creating a culture of teamwork and hard work. I'm going to get to the example. Don't worry, I'm going to get there. But it was creating the culture. It was creating the culture within the organization across that team. And the story that I like to point to was early on. It was first couple months. Every week we would have a directors meeting. All the department heads would get together, and in one of the meetings, I asked a question about some initiative, and one of the department heads pointed at another department head and said, "That didn't happen. It failed because so and so didn't do their job," and they just totally blamed this other person on the team. That gentleman who did that was fired the next day. And I think that sent a very clear message to the rest of the team that this is not how we're going to operate around here.
So one of the reasons, and it's a question, is one of the reasons you fired that person was to make an example because he was a middle manager or higher, or just you said, look, it doesn't get it. That's not the way we do.
That's not how we're going to do things here.
Yeah. One of the biggest things is kind of like when the finger points out, you got to point this way versus this way. Like that's one of the elements. Yeah. That's really cool. When did you see that the change succeeded? Was there a moment when you you walked around, maybe didn't recognize you, and you're like, you know what, job well done. I can step down, or I can bring other people.
It was a very that transition was very challenging for me, Boaz. And it was a roller coaster ride. So I had. When I moved to Colorado in March of 2012, I became chief operating officer of the public company, and I oversaw all operations at the new Blackhawk acquisition, as well as what was happening primarily in the casino at the Reno property. Let me back up a little bit, and it all makes sense in a minute. But after I finished graduate school, I moved back to Reno, and then I started coming up through some pretty remedial jobs for somebody with an Ivy League MBA. I was a slot supervisor and a restaurant supervisor. The first P&L I was in charge of was the arcade, which really is very similar to a slot floor. It's just a different demographic. And casino arcades actually make very good money.
Because the kids play while the parents are gambling or going to the spa.
Yeah. And so the first gaming department I became in charge of was the slot machine department. And the reason why is because in regional casinos, that's where you make most of your money. And so that was the first gaming P&L I was in charge of. And I was only in charge of that one department, but there are 5 gaming departments in most casinos. That's slots, table games, keno, poker, and sportsbook. Okay, those are the 5. And even though I was only the slot director, in one day, the other 4 gaming directors came to me and asked me for advice on the same day. And that was a huge moment for me because it showed me that I had earned their respect. They didn't have to come to me. God knows that when the son of the CEO shows up, everyone thinks he's going to show up as some entitled, uneducated, someone who's going to try to mail it in. And so in one day to have all 4 of them come to me for different issues, different requests, but just seeking advice, it meant a lot to me. And I think I had earned their trust to the point that, those folks would have stepped in front of a bus for me.
That's amazing.
Because I had earned it. But I want to go because you asked me a different question. In Colorado, when we first took over, basically on the day we took over, the general manager resigned. We did not have a director of marketing. We didn't have a director of slots. 4 of the major positions at the property were not filled. And so I added all those hats. In addition to being chief operating officer, I was also general manager. I was also slot director. I was also leading the marketing effort.
Did you sleep?
I had breakfast. I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner at my desk.
Wow.
I did not have time to breathe. I didn't have time to be nice. I didn't have time to get to know my team. And there was a day where the slot manager walked out of one of, basically my second in command's office, and he looked very upset, and he saw me when he walked out, and then just walked away. And I was befuddled. I said, so I went and asked the person, what was that about? He said, well, he just resigned. I said, well, why did he resign? He said, because of you. And then I did some more digging, and I realized pretty quickly that where I had earned everyone's trust and respect on the Reno team, and that they would, step in front of a bus for me, the Blackhawk team wanted to throw me in front of a bus.
And why is that? Because, like you said, you were too busy.
I didn't invest the time to build the relationships. I was just too focused on the bottom line of the company, and I wasn't focused enough on the team and communicating and building the culture. Really, I wasn't.
Okay, what a great second for me to pause, because look, with there's fire, people say I don't have time to deal with like being kind. I got to put the fire down, right?
Yeah.
I think in many moments when there's a crisis, personally or business-wise, you say, look, I put it aside. People say there's a reason why you don't write poetry during a battle, because you have to fight, right? And then later on, you can go and sit under the tree and write poetry. But you're saying it's something a little different. You said, look, the fact that I was so focused on the bottom line actually damaged my long-term commitment. So how do you juggle those two things? Because you're running into a fire. You came to a organization with no proper revenues, a mess, management is missing, ownership is missing. So it makes sense as an Ivy graduate that you're going to go to the bottom line, do a case study, and dive in. How do you find the balance between the two?
Look, it's hard. There's no it's not a science. It's not an exact science. I think you have to feel yourself through the darkness. But to me, the number one thing is communication. And it's trite. Everyone says that, but it's really the answer. And so you got to find a tactic to make sure that you are able to communicate with your team in an authentic way, and they can communicate back to you. Because in any big organization, if there isn't communication, then you have the rumor mills going and the conspiracy theories and the nonsense. Gossip. So, one very effective thing that I found, so when we bought this property in Colorado, it was just a little slot house. It had 750 slot machines and 10 blackjack tables. And over 10 years, and a tremendous amount of hard work from many people, and obviously the vision of the corporate leadership and my father, the CEO, we turned that into a resort. And you can imagine having to hire 1,000 people in the middle of COVID, because that's when we opened it, was in the middle of COVID.
Wow.
But what I instituted was once a week Zoom call. And this is one of the benefits, honestly, of COVID, is that people got used to Zoom and having meetings in Zoom. And in many ways, for these types of meetings, it's much more efficient. In the past, you want to have an all hands or all leadership meeting. Everyone has to pile into the boardroom. You have to wait till the last person shows up. And then anyway. So I just instituted 30 minutes once a week at the same time. Everybody get on this Zoom.
Everybody, like literally
no.
everyone from
No.
Management.
Leadership, management.
Okay. How many people on that team?
There was probably 20 people thereabouts, plus or minus.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, there are no questions that are off limits. Ask whatever question you want. If you're asking the question, there's probably somebody else thinking it too. And we had these from the time that we opened, or I would probably say a month before, from the day we knew what the opening date was going to be of the resort. We started a month before that, and we went for probably 3-6 months beyond that. Every week we had these calls, and sometimes it was a pretty benign check-in, and sometimes we got into discussions or debates or working out a specific issue. But the line of communication was open, and everyone knew it was open, and people quickly realized they really could ask whatever question they wanted.
Yeah, I
And-
think that's the point, right? Because
Yeah.
you can say not everything is safe in this room. You can say whatever it is, but if you chop someone's head off in front of that team, they're like, not really. It's just one of
Yeah.
the things you learned in like
Yeah.
business school, something
Absolutely.
to say. But the moment someone actually challenged you, so were you willing to be challenged by the team?
I was, and I did, and we handled those questions. Yeah, and that's part of the deal. Going back to what I said earlier about building authentic, genuine relationships. That's how you build trust with folks.
Yeah. Okay.
I, I think too often executive leadership thinks they can bullshit people, and it's a short-sighted thing to do. I think, what most of your team, all the way down to line level, they can smell
They can smell.
the bullshit, and so don't do that.
Do you think people bullshit because they think they're smarter, or do you think the top management bullshit because they are themselves are not willing to deal with the reality?
Yes, I think yes. So all of the above.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so I want to address one more thing that was really interesting for me. You were fighting or promoting the whole dealing with the crisis of gambling addiction, right?
Yes.
So I'll ask a very blunt New York question.
Please,
Were
yeah.
you doing it for the lobbying and for the credit, the way cigarette companies were doing it to quote unquote stop people from being addicted to nicotine while they're pushing it? Or is it something, or actually you felt like there's, well, I mean, why do you do it? Let's just start there.
95% of people can gamble responsibly. Okay. 5% of people cannot gamble responsibly. And so to me, the gaming industry can be very successful without being predatory. And
is most of the revenue come from the 95% or from the 5%? Because you might say that, and if I didn't know, I know nothing about gambling.
The gaming
but you can say, yes,
industry-
but those 5% gives me 50% of my revenue. So, I'm counting on them.
No, so I'll share a story with you, but it is true that in the gaming industry, your top 20% of your customers make up 80% of your revenues. What percentage of that 20% has a true gaming addiction? I don't think it's 5%.
Yeah.
That said, as the chief operating officer of the company, there were times where I identified or came to learn of somebody who had an addiction to gambling. And sometimes it was some of our biggest players. And when it was one of our biggest players, I myself, who had a relationship with that person because they were one of our biggest players, I myself went and sat down with them and said, we're not going to market to you anymore. I'm not going to feed this addiction. And here's a phone number that maybe you should call. Now,
and that's a rarity in the industry? Because if you're in Vegas and I have a guy who's flying in and blows, I don't know numbers, but let's just say $100,000 over poker games.
Just because he lost $100,000 doesn't mean he has an addiction. Like he could very well easily be able to afford that $100,000, and that's how he chooses to spend his money. God bless. But when and it took me a while to be able to identify what addiction looks like, but now I know what it looks like. But when I have a guy who calls me and says, I just need one more week extension on my marker limit because I'm going to get big money next week. And then the next week it's some other story. And then the next week it's some other story. Then you know that there's this person has challenges with gambling. And that's the kind of person that I sat down with and said, we're not going to market to you anymore. And God knows he went and gambled somewhere else, but I wasn't going to be the person that took his last dollar. And so with that background, when I was introduced to Kybridge Behavioral Health, which is today the leader in teletherapy and treating people across the country that have different process addictions, gambling addiction being one of them. You asked why I do it. Do I do it because it's a good, it's a good business, or is it good socially, or you didn't say it this way, but is the industry just looking for a fig leaf?
Yeah, and it can be a combination of three, by the way. Like
in this, the answer to this question is no. It's only 2 out of the 3. I'm not interested in the fig leaf, and I'm not interested in working with people that just want it for a fig leaf. We at Kybridge are very dedicated to helping people find paths to address any kind of addiction that they are feeling or that they're struggling with. And the reality is, if somebody is addicted to gambling, that's not their only challenge. They probably have other challenges like insomnia and anxiety. They may have challenges with money in general, and they started gambling because they thought that betting on basketball games was going to help them get out of the financial hole that they're in, and nobody ever explained to them that doesn't work, that you can't make money gambling.
And I think it's not sustainable either. Like, if you have a heavy gambler, they run out of money, and like any business that is purely based on addiction, I think it's maybe you can do very well for a very short period of time, but it's not sustainable.
The gambling industry is not the only one where there is a percentage of its consumers that can become addicted to their product and ruin that customer's life, right? I mean, alcohol, tobacco, even fast food, these types of things. People talk about gambling more, but it's actually one of the harder ones to identify. If somebody suffers from alcoholism, it's harder for them to hide it than if they're suffering from some kind of problem gambling. And so these are all the things that we at Kybridge are trying to address. We want to destigmatize this struggle for people so that they can go and get help. And I'm really, really proud to say that we have research. We could back up with data that we have accomplished. We've created our clinic, and our therapists have a program that can help people get better. And so going back to your original question, there's 2 things that drive me here. One, it's a good business. It's just dollars and cents wise, it's a good business. As gaming, and especially online sports betting, and now online gaming, like slot machines on your phone type of thing, have expanded across the country, the demand for services has increased. And so in any business, demand goes up, and there's really no supply to help these folks. It's a good business. But more important than that, it's the right thing to do socially. Gambling, if left unchecked, it can be very socially destructive. And that's why my family and I and Monarch as a company have been extremely vocal nationally that iGaming, online full gaming, should not be permitted. Right now, there are 7 states that have full online gaming where you can bet on blackjack or slot machine or sports betting. The biggest are New Jersey, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that is, it's very bad. It's very bad for society. It's dangerous. There are many academic reports that come out and show the correlation between increases in personal bankruptcy, increases in domestic abuse, increases in other social issues when iGaming becomes introduced. And so we are very vocal, and we are putting our dollars and our time behind trying to stem the growth of iGaming in this country.
What's the biggest gamble you took on in life?
Listen, right now I'm a private investor. I'm investing in startups, so it's just one big gamble after
That's
another.
roulette. So
Boaz.
that's pure roulette. That's not even
That's
gambling. It's
roulette.
not even
I do it.
blackjack.
I do it a little different
Yeah.
than most because
Yeah.
if I'm going to write a check, I get involved with the business. I take a senior leadership role, and I'm involved in the day to day of the business. So I only invest in businesses where I can not only invest my treasure, but my time and talent, and hopefully that'll give me some outsized returns. But I'm about, I'm 4 years in. I've made three, for me, big bets, and in 5 years, Boaz, you can ask me, and I'll either look like a genius or an idiot. But we'll see.
But does it experience like gambling, or it's calculated risk?
No, I mean, to me, it's calculated risk.
Yeah, you highly. So here's that's a good point. Because you're highly educated, you come from a massive background of business in your family and personal and great schools. So you might say to me, "Look, it's calculated risk." If I ask someone at the casino, will they give me the same answer? They say, "No, I'm not gambling. I'm calculating risk, and I can maybe I cannot count the cards, but I can get all those."
100%. I'm not in the when in my old role as a chief operating officer, I was not in the gambling business. I was in the gaming business. I was on the other side. I knew the numbers. I knew the
that's why your slot machines, you always win, right?
Yeah. Almost always. There are some unique ways that people can make a living playing, usually just video poker, but there are some other games now where they can do it.
If you give us that tip, then the podcast is going to become millions of people going to watch it because here's the guy who's like the COO who told us how to win in the casino. But
there's one machine that always pays, Boaz. One machine. Right above the machine, it has a sign. It says ATM. That's the machine that always pays.
So your investment, there's an element of risk there, right?
For sure.
Are you nervous or are you thrilled about that risk part? Because I'm trying to understand, like you come from such a deep understanding from a math perspective, which we'll talk in a second about, and all the way to like your experiences and all things. Like how much of when you go and invest in a company, how much is it you say, it's just a risk. I have to trust. Hopefully I did the right calculation, right background.
Listen,
or how much is like it's thrilling. I just have to, eventually life is full of risks.
That's life, right? It's doing your homework and then taking an educated risk. I think the biggest compliment I get from founders or fund managers that I speak with is when they say, "You ask me questions and go deeper than anybody else I've ever talked to, any investor I've ever talked to," and I wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah. Wow. When I after my real estate career, I ran a startup for a while, which didn't go anywhere. And one of the things I found is that when I was talking to especially Silicon Valley capital, I would say, like, kind of like a startup capital, I felt that I'm holding back, that they expected me to say, and maybe because I'm older, maybe because I come from real estate, maybe because I succeeded and failed many times, they were expecting me to be like one of those, I would say, gamblers who just put all the chip in the middle of the table and say, I'm betting everything on it. This is the answer to everything. They were expecting that in the roadshow. When I was saying, no, here's your risk, here's the thing. And I think that was disappointing for them from a fund perspective. Is that your experience?
Look, I think what you were experiencing was they want to know that your life depends on this success and that you are going to, come hell or high water, you're going to fight to the death to make it successful. I would say that wasn't one of my filters when I was looking at companies. I mean, for sure, I want to be founder first and understand that the founder is fully motivated, but I want to know they have deep expertise in what they're looking to do, and they've demonstrated resilience. One of the businesses that I've invested in, and I'm proud to be their president. It's an Israeli startup. Okay, 3 founders. One of the founders is the CEO. I guess I probably shouldn't give names or anything, but as even if you're a startup founder and there's a war going on, you're going to get called up to do reserve duty. And I'll tell you, his reserve duty is no joke. And a big percentage of their employees have reserve duty, and if they don't have reserve duty, their spouse has reserve duty. But despite that, over the last 2 years, the company has grown. It has improved its technology. It has increased its number of really international brands that are using the tech. This is the company is called Bytes, and it kind of it creates a whole learning cycle to teach frontline team members, and it's a very efficient tool. It's like TikTok and your learning video had a baby with an AI wrapper, and then a whole learning cycle. Very effective for frontline team member workforces. Now, Bytes has been able to grow over the last 2 years in the middle of a war where a big portion of their team has gone to reserve duty, has literally at times had a uniform on and has been shot at. The entire team has had missiles shot at them.
Despite the conditions, they have grown.
This is resilience. This is you can't be more resilient than this.
It's what reminds me. I remember when Bloomberg became mayor. I think it was worth about $4.5 billion, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, by the time he left the city hall 12 years later, because he ran 3 times, it was worth $21 billion. And I always looked at it and I was so inspired by it because that's the ultimate management setup. The fact that he was not like Trump, but he was really not involved in the business he built. And then it grown from personal wealth from 5 billion to 21 billion. And I always looked at it and I said, I don't have that ability. My organization, if I disappeared from my organization for a few weeks or a few months, you will see ongoing decline. I believed, right? I didn't have that ability and vision. So I think it's the same story. Those guys, those 3 people you're working with, whether it's you as a supportive team and president, or you succeeded creating a culture and tasks that despite the current condition, and you can be hands-on 24/7, they actually have grown in the most challenging times, which is amazing.
No question. They figure out a way to get it done. I'll give you two stories. This just happened. As you know, during Israel's war with Iran, you couldn't get out of Israel. There were no flights. There were no you couldn't take a flight. The only flights out of Israel were going to Tehran, and so they had lined up a booth and a panel at one of the most important conferences for their space in the U.S. for next week. And they said, well, we're not going to be able to go. We can't get out of the country. So they said, but let's find a way. So they called me and they said, hey, David, can you, I know it's short notice. Can you go to the conference? Can you do this panel? And I said, let's get it done. Let's get it done. Now, thankfully, the airport is now open in Tel Aviv, and they're able to get to the conference. 12
days war. But, exactly.
They found a way. There's a great book called The Banana King about this.
The Banana King.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I don't know it.
Yeah. So it's about kind of the immigrant who came to America and built the banana industry. He may have worked with certain banana republics and so forth and done some things, but it's a fascinating story. And in the book, he needed to get bananas from one side of a river to the other side, and people kept saying, well, there's no way to do it. And he said very simply, go build a bridge. He found a way. Was the story. But going back to what you said before, I'm very proud of this fact. I resigned as chief operating officer in September of 2021, 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. And the company and the 2 properties have grown. Both properties have increased every metric, top line, bottom line, margin, everything has increased. And I am proud of the fact that after my departure, the team has accomplished so much more.
Amazing. So last question, David. I know you're a professor also. What do you teach?
I teach casino operations at the hospitality school at Metro State University here in Denver. So most of your listeners have probably never heard of that school.
Well, all
Honestly,
your students going to listen. What are you talking
yeah,
about? You know?
it's really by design. I think Metro is a very special place. Most of the students at Metro are first generation college in their families. They're older. They're in their late 20s, early 30s. They are in college because they want to be in college, not because their parents told them they want to be in college. For me, the American dream is a very important thing. For me, making sure that we have equal opportunity for folks is a very important aspect of this country. And whatever we can do to help lift up those who maybe didn't get a head start because of their family situation or whatever growing up. Those are the people that want to put in the work to better themselves. Those are the people that we should be looking to extend our hand to and help lift them up.
Oh, great. I had a question, but you answered it. I want to ask you why you're teaching, and you said basically you're helping people fulfill the American dreams from your perspective.
Yeah, it was several years ago through this executive education program that I mentioned earlier, where we had a class talking about how the American dream today is not what it once was. And the likelihood that somebody's children in this country will, let's say, outperform their parents has diminished in a very real way. And we have to fix that. We have to fix that. People come to America, this is still the land of opportunity, because they believe that this is where their children will have a brighter future. It is certainly why my grandfather sent my father here. And that opportunity it's frankly not where it was. And we have to fix it.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. What a great... Well, David, so thank you. It's been, I knew that when we started walking on that path, I had no idea where it's going to go, but I knew that it's going to be fascinating. So we touched on politics and lobbying and business management and ended up with an inspiration thing. So thanks for your time. It's been an amazing conversation. And thanks for everything you're doing. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Boris. Thanks for having me.
Playbook. 2,500 years ago, there was a philosopher. He didn't see himself as a philosopher. His name was Socrates. And why am I bringing philosophy? Because Playbook is not about philosophy. Socrates was known and actually was killed for it. He literally was killed, and it was in court and was killed for it, for asking tough questions. He never made a point about saying what he understood. He never actually said, here's what you should believe in. All he did was ask tough questions. And every time someone gave him an answer, he said, yes, but why? But tell me more. Explain to me that. Did you really mean that? So why am I jumping to someone who lived 2,500 years ago? It's because I want to ask you a question. Do you ask tough questions? Or do you just accept on the surface answers? So when you work with someone or even with yourself, ask tough question. When someone gives you an answer, even if it's a brilliant answer, ask, what do you mean? Why? Tell me more about that. Because that's going to force them and you to think beyond the obvious answer. And by the way, we live in a world where everything is TikTok, 15, 20 seconds. We take for granted many answers. They're just on the surface. Your job is to ask tougher questions and keep on toughing, kind of peeling the skin again and go deeper and deeper and deeper. So even when someone gives you a great answer, pause and say, tell me more about that. Why do you think this way? Why should we do it? Because it's easy, especially if you're your boss, to say, no, the answer is no, I don't like your idea. But you might find new things when you ask yourself the question, why? Ask yourself why about everything, from your beliefs to the way you manage things, to advice you get, to the way you behave. You do something in the morning and you ask yourself, why do I do that? Oh, because I've been doing it for a year, 2 years. Well, why? When you start to ask questions and you ask tough questions, you're going to find a few things. One, you're going to find out that a lot of things, you're doing it because of it's a habit, because you haven't spent intellectual time, like the Socrates way of asking. You don't ask enough questions. So when you actually peel it, you find that a lot of things you do makes no sense. They're just something you're used to it. A lot of people answer you questions because they're as scared you're going to catch that they don't know the answer, or they have not themselves owned that things. So here's my playbook. It's actually really simple. Forget about the Socrates way of thinking. Ask why. Everything from what you eat to how you operate, to how much you sleep, to how do you work out, to how do you build a business. Ask yourself why and never be happy with the answer. Keep on going deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you spend this week, just this week, asking 5 times a day why to people that gives you an answer, you'll see your life is completely going to change. That's Playbook.